Hey everyone, it's Jen, and I'm here with part two of my April wrap-up. Alright, so in the second half of April, the first book that I read was The Tenant of Wildfell Hall by Anne Bronte. So April was the 200th anniversary of Charlotte Bronte's birthday, so I really wanted to read a Bronte book. And the reason I didn't pick Jane Eyre is because I just read Jane Eyre last February, so I didn't want to read it again so soon when there were books by other Bronte sisters that I hadn't read yet. And so I read this one. I loved this book. I thought it was fabulous. It's about a woman named Helen who moves into Wildfell Hall, this sort of large estate in this rural town in England. And one of her neighbors, the first little part of the story is told from his perspective, finds himself very fascinated by her and starts to become her friend and sort of falls in love with her. And when she rebuffs him, he doesn't really understand why. And then she gives him her diary entries for about like the past 7 years. So it's like years worth of stuff to sort of show why she can't love him and can't be in a relationship, like, and all that sort of stuff. And so this book was really interesting. It's generally considered one of the first feminist novels, and I really see why. It's very different from Charlotte Bronte's work. You know, the main character, Helen, just goes through so much, and her opinions on marriage and how women should be treated, it's really fascinating. And you can tell that these are sort of Anne's opinions too, whereas at the beginning of the novel, the narrator is a male character, and he's just sort of doted upon by his mother and his sister, and everyone just sort of is like, oh, like, what can we do? Like, everything has to be good for him. And then we're thrown into Helen's diary entries, where we see how, you know, she's just always making excuses for the men in her lives and trying to be like, oh, like, I can improve them, I can make them better, but when things go south, oh my god. So I just really love this book. It felt very modern to me just because of the way that certain themes are dealt with, and Charlotte Bronte hated this book. She hated it, which I find really hilarious for some reason. I love sibling rivalry. But this was definitely such an engaging classic, and I really highly recommend it, and I gave it 4 out of 5 stars. So I actually read this book as part of Dewey's 24-hour readathon, and the other book that I read for that readathon was The Sword of Shannara by Terry Brooks. This is the first book in the original Shannara trilogy, and I really had to push myself to get through this book. So the reason that I picked this up is because I love the MTV show, The Chronicles of Shannara. I really enjoyed the first season, and yeah. But this is not the book that the TV show is based on. This is the first book in the series, and the TV show is based on the second. But this was just like such a ripoff of The Lord of the Rings. Like, oof, in like a really bad way too. Just sort of everything about this book was very predictable, very plotting. And it's a long book. It's like 600 pages long. And thank God I read it during the readathon, because if I'd been reading it over like days and had like set it aside, I probably would not have picked it back up. But I pushed myself to get through it. Also, there are no female characters in this. None. There is one female character who shows up around page 400, but just to be a love interest for one of the men. She doesn't really do anything. So that pissed me off. And I know this book was written in 1977, but there were women in 1977, so not a fan. Although I did finish it, so I gave it 2 out of 5 stars, but I will report back on whether you should start with the second one or just leave this series alone. Next, I read All the Birds in the Sky by Charlie Jane Anders. This book, I was just enchanted by it. So in the beginning, we have the story of these two sort of misfit middle school kids who end up becoming friends just because they're both sort of the outcasts at their very bizarre prep school. So the main female character, her name is Patricia, and when she's very young, she meets a bird, and so basically Patricia is a witch. She's a witch. And when she's in middle school, she's having a really hard time dealing with it and doesn't know what to do about it, but she loves the outdoors and nature, The main male character is Lawrence, and he's more of like a tech savvy, like stay indoors, working on computers type of boy. And so they become friends until they sort of split up at the end of middle school and sort of go separate ways. So the book picks back up when they are both adults living in San Francisco much later, like after college, and how they sort of reconnect. And it's just very interesting to see what each of them have done with their own paths, like witchcraft and technology. And also, it's the end of the world, naturally. And so, how do these very different approaches to the world and nature? Obviously, Lawrence wants to save the world with technology, and Patricia is a witch and believes in nature and wants to use that. So, it's just very interesting. I really liked this book. Although I think I actually more enjoyed the parts when they were these sort of lost children together, and I really liked their relationship as kids. Although I thought the second half of the book was very interesting as well with them as adults because I was not really sure where the book was going to go, which is always great. And I love that it's this weird intersection of magic and technology. It's just so different from what I'm used to that I very much appreciated it. So yeah, I gave this book 4 out of 5 stars. The next book I read is What Is Not Yours Is Not Yours by Helen Oyemi. This is a collection of short stories that all have a little bit to do with magical realism and keys and books. So these short stories are somewhat related in theme, but not really in characters. Like I've read some other collections of short stories where the characters are very interrelated, but that wasn't really the case in this. There were a few characters who were like name dropped in different stories, but they weren't sort of the tight connection that I'm used to when I read linked short story collections. But all of the stories were really different and very interesting. Yeah, this was a tough one to review because some of the stories I really enjoyed and some of them I was just sort of like, eh. But I guess that's what happens with story collections. Some you like a lot more than others. But yeah, Helen Oyemi is definitely one of the more difficult writers that I've read. It's very much a commitment. I found myself only reading like 1 or 2 stories at a time just because I really needed to read them and then like let them settle and sort of think about it. So yeah, overall I really enjoyed this collection and I gave it 4 out of 5 stars. The next book that I read was A Study in Scarlet by Arthur Conan Doyle, the first Sherlock Holmes mystery. So I'm living in London, I love the BBC Sherlock show, and I've never read any of the actual mysteries, so I figured I would give it a shot since A Study in Scarlet is the first one and it's very short, only about 100 pages long. And I liked it a lot. Like, there were a lot of elements in here that I was like, oh, okay, yeah, I see how they incorporated that into the TV show. What I wasn't expecting was for all part 2 of this novel to just sort of be the backstory about why the murders occurred. I was like, am I reading the same book just because it was in such a different setting, such different characters that I was very confused at first, and I just sort of wanted to get back to Sherlock Holmes and Dr. Watson and just sort of get their take on it instead of sort of watching this flashback happen. And at first I wasn't sure even how it was related, but obviously it became clear as I read on, but still it was very confusing and mystifying. But yeah, overall I did enjoy the story, and I am definitely going to be picking up some more of these Sherlock Holmes mysteries. And I cannot wait to see where they take me and what else I recognize from my avid TV viewership. And the last book that I read in April was The First 15 Lives of Harry August by Claire North. I have been wanting to read this book since January, and I just never seemed to have the time or the inclination to commit to what seemed like a very long book, but once I got into it, it really flew by. It was very... like, this book, you guys... Whoa. Yeah, I was very invested in this book right away, probably because I was reading it on the train to Scotland, and one of the first things that he mentions in about chapter 2 is that he was born in the Berwick-upon-Tweed train station, which I passed through on my way up to Scotland, so I was like, yes, perfect. Yeah, I don't really want to say too much about the plot of this book just because I didn't know a whole lot about it going in, and I really enjoyed it so much more that way. I sort of knew that I knew that Harry August was a bit of a time traveler, but I didn't know in what way, and I think that just reading it sort of blind really helped my experience because I wasn't sure what was going to happen or what the plot of this book was going to be, but it's very interesting, and I really enjoyed the way it was told and how it sort of folded out. So, yes, First 15 Lives of Harry August got 4 out of 5 stars. Alright, so that is it for my April reading. I am going to link down below part 1 of my April wrap-up, so all the books that I read in the first half of April. Yeah, so let me know if you've read any of these books, what you thought of them. I would love to chat about them down below. And let me know what you've read this month that you really loved. I had a pretty good reading month this month, so I'm really happy about that. And I can't wait for next month. So I will talk to you guys soon. Bye!